Step into the grounded world of health and skepticism on today's Crackin Backs Podcast with Dr. Grace Hameister. We're digging into earthing. Does connecting with the planet's surface truly heal, or is it just grounded in wishful thinking? From synthetic shoes to the science of sleep and blood flow, we'll explore how touching the earth beneath us might be the key to battling chronic diseases and rebalancing your body's systems. Tune in as we sit through the evidence, the myths, and the potential of grounding to transform our health.
All right, Dr. Grace, we're so happy to have you back on the show. I mean, you look fabulous, by the way. Great eyebrows. We brought you back because there's a surge of talk regarding the concept of grounding or earthing, and I've been hearing it a lot in my practice just in the last couple of months. I know Dr. Spencer has as well. And I first heard about this concept almost 22 to 30 years ago, and I heard it from you. And so who better to bring you on the show to talk about it from the person that told me about it? And even though I know the concept or the father of grounding is Clint Ober, I am coming to you because I learned about it from you, and I figured that was to go right to the source that I learned from. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's so great seeing my two favorite guys in the chiropractic profession and in the world in general. I love you guys. You know that. You are fabulous. No, seriously, you two are such a beacon in our community and in the medical community, because you do take very scientific information, utilize it in your practice, and you make people's lives better for it, and you're fearless with it. And that's one of the things that's always inspired me about working with you, and then just having you guys as colleagues and friends too. Plus your dork.
Love you.
I love dork.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks.
So before we really dive into our questions, give some disclaimers and let's talk about the father of grounding, Clint Ober.
Yeah, I would not be able to be speaking about any of this if it wasn't for Clint. So just from my perspective, everything you're about to hear from me today was directly taught to me by him. It's all his work. It's all his blood, his sweat, his tears for over 20 years. He is such a dynamic and cool dude. He grew up as a cowboy in Wyoming, literally like a cowboy, like on horses and taking care of their cattle in the range. And so he's been very close to the earth and to Native American culture, especially in that area too. And he has a very spiritual connection with how we connect with our bodies and the earth from just having those very early memories. And he taught me about those and told me about those from a long time ago. And then he got into a really interesting field of study, which was the cable industry. And this is where his ideas of grounding kind of came into play. He, if your television set isn't grounded with when you have cables, if any kind of static electricity comes in, the picture goes weird, or God forbid, there's like lightning that's around you. Hello, Florida. That you get every day at 3:00, right? I know.
Yeah.
So that will literally go into your house and blow up your TV if it's not grounded. So these are where the grounding principles came from. And then his interest in electronics and electricity and data. Do you guys realize Clint Ober is the reason that data gets streamed into our computers? He made the very first, modem, cable modem. He's the guy that created the cable modem. I didn't know that. I had a conversation with him, and I was like, what? You did that? So this guy's been tinkering with grounding through electricity and data exchange through satellites since the 60s, the 50s and 60s. And that is the basis of where all of this comes from. And then how it translated over into what we now know as grounding, and how he started making the leaps forward to how our bodies can be affected by it. He was in his house, and he had, because of being a cowboy, and Terry, I know you know this with all of the cowboys you've treated over the years, there's a lot of injury involved with that. So he's got bad ankles, bad wrists. He's got back pain and all this stuff. And he was noticing he used a device, like any device you can get, that just tests for amperage, right? And he noticed that in his bedroom there were higher doses of amperage than there were in other places. So he went to the hardware store and he got some duct tape that had either aluminum or copper in it. I can't remember at this point, but one or the other. He put that on his bed and put an alligator clip on it. On the end of the alligator clip, he put a wire, and then he stuck that wire onto a rod and into the earth, like the actual ground of the earth. And that night, he slept the whole night through, which he had never done in like years, and he woke up with less pain. At that point, he's like, there's something going on here. Yeah. So that was the beginning of his journey of figuring out all the things that we're about to talk about with the studies that they've done, which, by the way, are double-blind randomized trials done in very prestigious university systems, as well as reported in extremely prestigious periodicals. So the science we're talking about here is the real deal, and you can look at any of it too on earthinginstitute.net. That's where he's published all of this stuff, earthinginstitute.net. And you can also just look at it, PubMed, or one that's really super easy too is Google Scholar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or not, but if you put in Google Scholar in your browser, you'll actually be able to look at studies instead of going down the Google rabbit hole of bullshit information and look at the stuff that's real according to the studies that we're talking about. So that's the background of Clint. That's how I got in contact with him. He was building his prototype. He was building his prototype and about to do some thermal imaging studies back in about 2002, 2004. And that's when I came in contact with him. He was doing that in San Francisco, and I was working in a clinic that was with a naturopath at the time who was really ahead of his time with using high-tech therapeutic devices and thermal imaging and detecting breast cancer from that way back in the day. And that's when Clint walked into our office. And so I had the opportunity to learn from him at that point. And that's where my story with Clint and his background all comes together.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned Google when you put bullshit Google. I'm glad you mentioned that because, you know, I was hearing people going, grounding doesn't exist, or it's bullshit, it doesn't work. And then you go to Google and you'll see one says this study promotes improved sleep, reduces inflammation, better blood flow. And then you'll see another study, not enough scientific evidence, and there's methodological weaknesses. It doesn't hold water. And so no wonder some of these lay people get confused because, you know, one statement says it works and the next statement says it doesn't, and then your little AI on the right said there's not enough evidence to support this, it doesn't work, and blah blah blah. So that's what this show is all about, to clear up the mud. And so can you give us not only just the studies but the basic, what is earthing, which is another term for grounding, what's the concept of it and why does it work?
Well, I love that you said that we're going to clear up the mud. No pun intended there. What earthing is and what grounding is you in contact with nature, and it's free, period. That's what it is. So the basis of this whole scientific entity of grounding, if you will, is that the earth itself carries a charge. It's negatively charged, free electrons just on the surface. It occurs because of the sun hitting the earth's surface, and you get extra activity that creates energy. And so you have these just free floating radicals. Unlike in our body, free radicals can be damaging, right? These actually do the opposite. They're actually in so much excess that it helps to stabilize the free radicals in your body. That's the whole purpose. So as long as there is an electron flow is what is the key to successful grounding. So if you're barefoot on the ground, and And even when you're barefoot, like if you have less calluses and if you have, as close to skin as possible when you're on the ground, your body is automatically exchanging current with the current that's on the earth. I mean, we now know, look at studies done by, say, James Oshman, another good colleague and friend of ours, right? The quantum physicist who wrote the book Energy Medicine, which, by the way, is one of the premises for how Clint was inspired to look into some different forms of research that we'll be discussing later. Oshman helped to write and conduct some of these experiments. And so they're like a whole nother level when you're looking at efficacy, right? So anyway, going back to the electron transfer and electron flow, as soon as your feet are on the ground and as soon as your skin is in contact with the earth, you're immediately neutralized to the same frequency as the electric frequency that's on the earth. So there's different ways that they've found out if that works or not. One, Clint started messing around with a capacitor. A capacitor will stop the electron flow from happening, but just keep the amperage or the hertz up or something. I don't know. This one is, I'm not an electrician, so that I cannot be quoted with how capacitors work. Please don't even get me to try talking about that. I'll talk about the science of the body stuff all day long, but I can't go deep into capacitor. But what I can tell you is I know that it stops the electron flow. Okay. And when they did studies on smaller groups of people, when the capacitor was part of the earthing equipment, people's pain came back and their inflammation came back. But when they did not have the capacitor and there could be a full stream of electronic flow, because all you're doing is having that wire directly bringing in what we normally used to have all the time, because we were wearing leather shoes and we were barefoot all the time in the summer, like people had more connection with the earth. And it's not just the dirt either. It's rocks in the mountains and the water. If you're in the ocean, like your lakes, you're getting all of this electric current. It's all part of Mother Earth, right? And once you tap into it, your body receives free radical damage like activity where it gets neutralized. And the studies that they did show that in a few different ways.
Grace, let me. You brought up a interesting point. So we kind of know, and it may be a knowledge base that everybody's aware of, or a lot of people are aware of. We sleep better when it's raining or when it's storming out, or I think we have, or just being. You get there was like an ion exchange or something like that. Does that have anything to do with? Would you happen to know if that has, an electrical conductivity experience with the earth?
International sign of electricity. Yes.
Yes. Right.
Anybody who's not watching this right now, just go watch the video. It was funny. Okay, so
right.
Your point is actually poignant. And from my experience and from what I understand, the reason that people may sleep better with the rain or with thunder and lightning and that kind of thing is kind of twofold. One is the frequency of the meditative component of it. There's a lot of binaural sound that happens with rain and frequency that calms down the nervous system. It calms down your brain so that you don't have as much of the hamster wheel going on in your brain, so you can relax and chill more. That's one thing that happens with storms. But also, just think about conduction, right? If your feet are dry and you're standing on the earth, that's one way to look at it. Now put feet with rain and standing on the earth.
Yeah. Okay.
How much more are you going to take in? Got it? Right?
Yeah.
So
much more.
when there's rain, that means you're also going to have higher dew points in the air. So you're going to have more water in the air. So that'll also be attracted to your skin, which means that your skin becomes more conductive as a full body system instead of just your feet or whatever you're touched to. So there's those two aspects of it. There's the meditative, and then there's the water conductivity.
Love that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, the big problem that we experience now in society is now everybody's into sneakers. It's become a collector's item. So in other words,
everybody's covering their feet constantly and, spending tons of money on sneakers or, or shoes even. But how's that transition from, barefoot to synthetic footwear? And how has that affected society? Would it happen to have anything to do with some of the chronic, illnesses and immune disorders that we have today?
Actually, there is a correlation. There's an epidemiological correlation with when we started excessively producing plastics. Plastics have only been around for 60 years. Do you realize that?
No.
I know. It blows my mind. It feels like they've been
Really?
around for 1 or 200 at this point, right? But it's only in the last few years. And the same case goes for it's the same time that they started industrializing our food, like with trans fats and excitotoxins. What is a trans fat? It's like one molecule away from plastic. It's what makes it stay with a shelf life. That's the same thing. So there's a massive correlation between plastics, our feet, and our food. And I know that we're not going in the food direction today, but they were both synthesized at the same time. So you can now recognize the fact that not only are things that you are ingesting completely altered, but now we are no longer connected to the earth and that electric frequency that helps to mitigate the excessive damage from those oxidative species, because we're not connected to the earth to do it. Usually we were, and so we had this whole infinite supply of electrons to help us to decrease those damaged tissue situations, right? So yeah, there's definitely a correlation between the advent of plastics and rubber, us wearing things like that on our feet and our bodies, our skin. I mean, think a lot of our clothes being polyester. Our rugs, remember the rugs in the 70s? Those were all completely like sitting in a sound room in a podcast. There was zero frequency moving in or out of your body from the earth with that kind of stuff. So it depends on what your floor is. It depends on where you're standing. And yes, it depends on even, the thicknesses of the calluses of your feet and how well you can have conductivity. But there's 100% correlation between the toxins in our environment, the toxins we now eat, and the synthetic plastics and rubbers that were created all at the same time to go into both verticals of commerce.
Grace, I got when I first got introduced to grounding, we would do thermographies on the body and see all the hot spots, the reds, the yellows, and then we would put that lay on the bed and wires into the ground, and all of a sudden within 20 minutes they're green and people felt better. You mentioned that a little bit about Clint taking the alligator plugging into a rod and going into the ground. Yet we see some of these commercial products that are considered grounding mats and grounding mattresses and grounding this and that, and you plug them into the wall of the house, and we've actually I haven't gotten any results. I've looked at people and they go, I feel the same. And so we're now commercializing this whole grounding thing. And I'm thinking maybe that's where some of the skepticism comes from, because they don't work. Can you explain why some work and why some don't work? Running wires out of your house is sometimes better, even though it's sometimes it's very difficult to do if you live in the city. Right. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's one thing that just needs to be addressed here is what are you testing for? You can test to see if your outlet is grounded or not. And if you buy the right equipment, which is Clint's equipment, they provide you with that tester. So if somebody is plugged into a plug in their house that may not potentially have a grounding segment, they're not going to get the effect. So you need to make sure, because think about it. Obviously, your house is grounded. All the electricity in the house has to be grounded. It's code. It's impossible to have electricity in your home without it being grounded. So, I remember even talking to Clint about this too. He's like, what, even if you have zero access to getting something out of a window, go and just hold on to one of your copper pipes. A copper pipe goes down into the ground, and going to carry a charge. Now, how long you have to hold it is a whole lot more. You may have to be there for a while, right? But the point is, there's nothing in your home that shouldn't not be grounded. So if you're not getting results with using a grounding pad, you're probably using one that's a knockoff of his work, and you might be using one that's not in a actually grounded outlet.
So for those people, so you would just have to test each outlet to find out which ones are actually grounded and which ones aren't. Is that
Yeah, you
what
just
you're
plug
saying?
in the whole thing. It's like this. It's about 2 inches long and 3 inches tall with 2 little lights on top. And when you plug it into your outlet, the lights come on or they don't. So it's classic, again, electrician stuff that I don't understand because I'm too much more interested in biology. But now I'm realizing that biology is electricity. So it's kind of becoming one and of the same. In fact, that was the big ahas that came out of a lot of Clint's work and their research. It was that our immune system is an electric circuit, and just as much as our cardiovascular system is an electric circuit. Fascinating, isn't it?
There's a book, oh my gosh, maybe 40 years ago by was it Fritjof Capra? No, it was called The Body Electric. And it was this thick on the quantification and qualifications of, but they used salamanders and how they regenerate tails if you break off a tail of a salamander, and they were looking to figure out how they can do that with the human body, which would be pretty cool. But that was like 40 years ago, so I haven't quite discovered that yet.
That actually was what inspired me. Clint asked me to do a study with him, and this is at a time when I had just come out of school and I was such a kid. Oh my God. And I'm like, okay. Cause I had, experience doing cancer research and immunology in the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And so I was familiar with lab work and I like doing lab work, but to design a study and perform one outside of having any sort of accredited place to do it, I was kind of fish out of water on that one. But I did give him an idea that he really liked, and it was using that same premise, Spence, where there's a nematode or a worm. If you cut it in half the long way so that it splits, it regenerates and just comes back together. Or you can chop off its head and it'll grow a new head. It's just this weird little worm, right? So what I wanted to do was put some in petri dishes and cut off some of the tail or whatever, and have those petri dishes sitting on Clint's earthing pad, and then have the other ones not on an earthing pad, and just see how long the regeneration process would happen. So I never got to do the experiment, and I still could now, I guess, just to do it just for funsies. But I'm not going to try to write some sort of paper that's going to get published in Nature magazine. I'm like, it's just not what I'm trying to accomplish. But the idea is exactly that. The body regenerates, and it will do that if you let it. And if you give it other things to help facilitate your natural processes, it's going to help it even faster.
Love that. That's pretty cool. Yeah, actually, that book was done so long ago. I think it was by a medical doctor, Robert Becker. I was reading another book, Fritjof Capra, that was pretty cool at the same time many years ago. So I wanted to stand corrected on that. But the introduction of and I'm glad Dr. Terry qualified. I've always heard of grounding, and then the other day I was talking about you being on the show, and they didn't know what grounding was. I go, and they were of my generation. They said earthing, and I go, oh, because when did that transition, or was that always synonymous, grounding and earthing, or did it change?
You know what? That one's above my pay grade. I'm sorry, I don't know. Just to be honest, well, then, there's sometimes you can be really smart and be a doctor and say, you know what, I don't know. I'll have to look that up, because I genuinely don't. I've heard every time that we've ever had discussions with Clint, he's used both. So I honestly, I don't know, and I don't think one is exclusive of the other. I think it's just what you know, honestly.
No, that's fantastic. I wanted to ask about the those grounding mats, the ones that you don't feel anything. You just lay on it, and it's plugged into the wall and what have you. And there's a multi-level marketing company which kind of put a bad taste in my mouth when I got exposed to it. That even though it has merit, and we saw somebody marketing it to a lot of our athletes, and some had a good experience. I don't know if it was power of suggestion, and others didn't. Can you give a little perspective on those grounding mats?
I'll give you a huge perspective on that. Hold on. Look at this. Oh. As I'm sitting here.
You're sitting.
Look at that.
Oh,
but
look at you.
Is from Earthing. This is Clint's work right here. So I'm sitting on this because I actually do have a little low back pain today, and the two best doctors I know live on the other side of the coast, so I just have to sit here and deal with it until I can get to my guy a little later. But since I woke up this morning and was preparing for this is how I sit, and I'm wearing shorts right now so that I can be skin on this pad and receiving all that electric flow. And
it's plugged into the wall.
I'm plugged into an extension cord that is grounded. It has
cool, Grace.
Do you guys want to hear something?
Wait, Grace, I'm going to interrupt something right there, because if Spencer and I sat on a mat with shorts on, we would not be touching skin to the mat.
You wouldn't go back to your home shorts.
Back in the 70s, I probably would have took out my hot pants. The short, or now they call them boy shorts. For you girls, they call them boy shorts.
Shorts. Show off those legs. You're working too hard, right?
Oh my
God. I'm sorry.
I got him to blush.
No, I'm not blushing. Oh yeah. Wait, how do you know? He's always tan. So I do have to go back to the concept. How long is there a time frame that research says is a good amount of time per day? Is there like a quantitative time when we should be connected?
As a matter of fact, from Health Magazine in 2015, there was a study, and this is the actual title of the study: 1 hour contact with the Earth's surface, grounding, improves inflammation and blood flow, a randomized double-blind pilot study.
Now, is that a continuous hour, or is that broken up through the day?
1 hour. Yeah, they said 1 full hour. And they used thermal imaging with this one too, as you were discussing earlier. And they showed clear improvement in circulations of fluids, including blood through the torso, which translated into enhanced delivery of the blood to the head and improved blood circulation in the face. So all that was shown on thermal imaging in this study too. And it did show that there was 1 hour. I'm going to read it for you. It says, the results of this innovative study demonstrate that even 1 hour contact with the Earth appears to promote significantly autonomic nervous system control of body fluids and peripheral blood flow. 1 hour.
And
wow.
And when was that? 2015, you said?
2015. Correct. So
a long time ago. And so the other question I have is, is it the more you contact? So like if you want to sit in the sand at the beach, and you put your entire body in the sand versus just walking on the feet, is there any studies that say the more skin is in contact, the better, or is it just any body part?
The premise is that just as long as you're connected, just like when the rod is connected into the Earth, it doesn't have to be like a cylinder that's 10 feet wide. It just having that rod in there allows for electrical conduction, So obviously if your whole body is laying down, you're just going to be able to absorb more efficiently, just like I said earlier though too, like if your body's on the sand and it's wet, then you're going to get even better conductivity, So just think more so of the process of conduction and yeah, I mean, from what I understand, the more you can get contact, like time wise, the better, because we have always been in contact. Our bodies are designed to have had contact with the Earth all the time. And then through industrialization, when we stopped doing that, we stopped having that natural mitigator of reactive oxygen species that just hang out in our bodies and create tissue damage. So if as much time as you can be, you can't overdo it. I mean, it's our feedback loop. Look at it like that. It's our feedback loop, right? If you have inflammation, there's something in your body that brings inflammation down, right? And we're not going to go into all the details of that, but we know that there's the omega-3s and there's the prostaglandin cascades, and there's all these. Everything in our body has a sense of homeostasis. If something goes up, there's something there to come in and bring it back down, so you have homeostasis, so that you're at that natural, normal, pain-free, optimal state. That's our purpose, is to be here like that. Not to be in pain all the time and figure out how to not have pain and take a pill for it, but instead find out where that pain's coming from and amplify the piece of that homeostatic cycle that's being blocked off. And earthing / grounding is one of those things that helps to do that in every single cell of your body, because every single cell of your body has an electric charge. I mean, one of the coolest studies that I read that Clint told me about this one too, and this is the one that kind of blew my mind, and I'm like, all right, I'm never going back to not using this ever again. He made an alliance with a cardiologist who was a retired cardiologist in San Diego. In cardiology, it's the one practice in allopathic medicine where they're super aware of electricity. And when they do cardiac surgery, they have to ground the patient, and they ground room, because why? We have a sinoatrial node. Our sinoatrial nodes are now measurable 15 feet from our body, creating electric current. These are some things that James Oshman told me about, like back in the early 2000s. You can actually measure the electricity from the sinoatrial node 15 feet from our body. So when you're doing surgery on a cardiac patient, they have all that electricity to keep the heart going when the blood's flowing. Especially if it's open heart surgery and they're just working on the heart not pumping, they have to have all these other things pumping so you stay alive. And then they bring the heart back to life with the electricity, right? So that's why working with a cardiologist was so important for Clint, because they were like two peas in a pod when it came to talking about electricity, but just bioelectricity versus electric, current, right? Well, the very first study that they did, they took a whole bunch of doctors from the hospital and they took their blood, and they used dark spectrum microscopy, where you can look at the live blood, right? And almost every single doctor in that hospital had a rouleau formation. What a rouleau formation is when your red blood cells stack up on themselves, how they look in a Lifesavers pack, right? Or like if you would stack up chips at the gambling table, like that's called a rouleau formation. And when that happens, microcirculation decreases. You can't get oxygen through those little tiny vessels in your body. So you start getting like brain fog and pain states and tingling, and you get less oxygenation. If you have less oxygen, you have less ability to fight off pathogens. Anything that's a bad guy, like a virus, bacteria, anything that your body needs to fight off against, cannot live in an oxygen-rich environment. So the less oxygen you have, the more propensity you have for disease as well. So all these doctors had this rouleau formation. They put the guys on a pad like this inside the hospital, the one that I'm sitting on, and they took their blood 4 times in the hour. At the end of the hour, every single one of them had 0 rouleau formation, which means that they conclusively could show that the red blood cells directly intake the current from the earth and then repel each other. Because they're all negatively charged, they repel each other, which makes the blood more viscous and makes everything oxygenate better and everything move better through your body. Shut up with that. I mean, come on. If anybody has any kind of understanding of science or just like love of the body and how profoundly amazing the connection is with things, you can't unsee that. You can't unhear that. You cannot tell me for 1 second that needs to be debunked. It doesn't. It's just, you looked at blood, it looked like this before. You looked at blood, it looks like this now. And then they took that study and went further and deeper with it too, but it's pretty cool as far as I'm concerned.
Why do you think it hasn't caught on like wildfire based on these principles that are based on truth.
Yeah, I can only speak from the place where I learned it from, which is these principles and truth. I haven't been exposed to the MLM you're talking about, and thank God I don't want to be. I mean, any of the studies that you read, when you really look at these from the perspective of true science and double-blind randomized placebo trials, which is what Clint did and his team, they had no idea what the outcomes would be. But they just kept seeing over and over and over again how inflammation was affected, how pain was reduced, how body function increased, how the autoimmune disorders decreased. It was just again and again all kinds of statements about this by doing actual research.
Just out of curiosity, and this just came to mind. Not everybody's close to the beach. Or not everybody, not everybody can walk barefoot on a grassy area. Does even walking on pavement have it? I mean, can you walk barefoot on a sidewalk or no?
This one, I was curious about that too, and actually, I read about it on at earthing.com's website. They have like a whole space that just has all of this information and these studies and stuff. And again, if you go to earthinginstitute.net, there's a lot more of these studies and that kind of thing. But there's an FAQ portion there, and they do say that being on the cement can have an impact on decreasing your decreasing the blockage of electronic flow. Right, you'll still get some of it, but of course you can't have rubber shoes on. And which is another problem, right? And it also said too, like even just exfoliating your body, how close to the skin can these electrons actually get, right? Like things like this, so there's all these little nuances too of how connected you are. But the obvious and most clear way to do it is to just, even if you are in the middle of the city. Pretty much every city in America has some parks, and best case scenario, get yourself a pad and put it on your bed from Clint. That's,
you mentioned the pad, if for those listening, if they're businessmen sitting at a desk and they can't put on their hot pants or their G-string like Spencer, can you take the pad and literally put it on the ground?
I cannot unsee that. Really?
Right? I had to go there, but
I swear I'm wearing pants today. I promise.
So if they can't sit on the pad, they could literally put it on the ground, take their shoes and socks off, and while they're at their desk working, they could put their bare feet on this pad.
Correct. Yes.
Right. And get their hour a day, right? So if they're the stressful lawyer, the CPA, the CFO that's glued to a desk for 14 hours a day, they're not seeing clients, they can take their shoes and socks off, put a mat, as long as it's tested, on the ground, put their bare feet on it while they're working at their desk, and get their 100%. Hour a day doing 100%. That.
Or you can put the pad on top of your desk and put your computer on top of it, so your hands are on the pad while you're using your computer. You can get creative with it with all kinds of ways.
Would the mat affect the computer?
No, it'll make it less staticky. That's one of the reasons that Clint did this in the first place.
Grounded.
He was living in Arizona, and every time he would touch his computer, and this was back in the day when it took forever for the modems to you'd listen to that. You remember those? So he would have to turn his computer on and off a lot. And so he put a grounding strip by his wrist, and he would touch that copper strip first, and then he touched his computer, and he never had to turn it off again. So if anything, it helps. Now, most computers don't even have that as an issue anymore, but they do have, emission of EMFs. So it helps to reduce that intake as well, too.
Interesting.
And of course, what's really interesting is if you just surf around on earthing.com, they've got all kinds of products. Like they even have flip-flops now. They have shoes you can wear that allow for conduction through them. So that's kind of cool that you can have that. They have pillowcases. They've got socks. They've got like a throw. So if you're sitting and watching TV, you can have this blanket throw on you, and you're getting your grounding through that. So there's a lot of different options that what Clint likes to call the creature comforts. At first it was all just about this plastic pad, and it was really not comfortable to sleep on. It sounded like you're about to get murdered. Like somebody's like putting plastic on your bed for you just in case. But it's a lot different than that now. And there's a lot of other options of things to use, including, patches and stuff too that, like back in the day, Terry, that's what we had, right? We had the little patches thing that we put around the wound sites to be able to accelerate tissue repair. And they still have those kinds of like TENS units sort of patch stuff that you can use too. So there's just go on the website and look at what they've got. And it's a lot different.
Going back to the science, lately we've had a lot of increase in mental health and anxiety, depression, and we know that our sympathetic nervous system, our parasympathetic system, needs to be in balance for our brain and our brain health to be in balance. How does grounding affect both our parasympathetic and sympathetic, according to the research?
From what I found, that particular vertical of study was really brought to a space of clarity with some of the cortisol studies that they were doing. As you know, our flight or fight hormone that gets released is cortisol, right? When the sympathetics are starting to do their job. Now, unfortunately, we don't ever stop running from the bear anymore. Right? That's what our systems were made for at the time. The adrenals kick in so that your ass can get kicked in and run away from the bear, right? But then you finally get away, and you get to the tree, and you can just take a breath and okay. And then you'll be able to poop again and sleep again and all the other things. So cortisol creates the constipation. It creates that heightened awareness. It creates the inability to sleep because you're trying to survive, stay alive, right? So the interesting correlation between grounding and cortisol that was done, and this was also done by that cardiologist in the study that they did, cortisol at midnight starts to drop, and it drops significantly so that you're sleeping, right? At 4 a.m., it starts to rise and spike again, which is what's giving you the energy to want to get out of bed. And it keeps rising and spiking until about 6 p.m. That's a natural cortisol cycle if you're connected to the earth. And here's the fascinating part. The earth, and this is what they found through doing this as far as why the cortisol actually gets affected, because the cortisol did go down. He did a study that with a bunch of people and had them do cortisol testing. And then for, I think, a 6-week period of time, they were using the earthing equipment, and they came back. And when they first started, everybody looked like spaghetti. Like there was no rhyme or rhythm to the timing of stuff. This is what he said. It looked like spaghetti. But then when the study was over, it was in a complete perfect band. Like all the people had the same timing when their cortisol was released. So what they discovered with that is okay, it obviously has nothing to do with light, because, the grounding equipment has no effect with light. It's just the earth. So there's something about the earth that's happening when we sleep that we're connecting to, right? So what they found was that when the sun starts to rise on your part of the world, there's these little eddies that are created of electricity, and they start to activate. The eddies activate so that there's more the heat that rises, like all the activity that happens from the sunshine hitting, and the electrons become more energized. As the electrons are becoming more energized, that's infusing into your body, so you're becoming more energized, right? Now, here's what's also interesting, and Spencer, you'll be with me on this one, and you too. You will too, Terry, because you know my patterns with this one. But at 2 p.m. every day, cortisol goes down again because the eddies get very quiet again at that time. So that siesta time, or my nap time, don't mess with my nap time, because I always want to have my naps, right? That's if you feel tired between 2 and 4 p.m., it's because you're probably more connected to the earth than most people. because the earth is tired at that time. I know, right? So like nap time, we're on it. So that's I thought was a really fascinating thing to me as well. So
Interesting.
the sun energizing the earth is what regulates cortisol, and that affects electron flow. So the more we can regulate cortisol, the more we can decrease the excessive damaging mental and women's health issues, thyroid problems, female hormone issues. When there's excess cortisol in your system, the cortisol eats the female's normal hormones first to get fuel to stay alive, which crashes our thyroid and causes pre-menopausal symptoms, or if you're in menopause, it makes it even worse for us. So women in particular get a double whammy with this. If you are in a stressful environment, if you are not mitigating your cortisol levels and getting them to decrease into their normal patterns and normal spaces, cortisol goes in and starts taking away from your other hormones to keep itself functioning, and then you have even more problems. So the sympathetic nervous system never shuts up, basically. Is what happens. And by using the grounding mechanisms and getting those continuous flows of electric not electric, but oh my god, my brain just totally went burp. The electron flow there, excuse me. But getting that a continuous electron flow, it helps to get you more in tune with the natural rhythms of the earth, and therefore decrease cortisol, therefore decreasing a lot of the problems that we have with not only female health disorders, but also mental disorders.
I always heard that, things about full moons and the way the tide pulls in and out. And I mean, these things that you've been hearing about the effects on behavior and for years, like full moon. And I would often ask a friend of mine who worked in the emergency room, and she swore by the fact that you during full moon, you'd have more people going crazy, admitted to the emergency room. So it kind of makes sense, that we respond to the Earth's atmospheric changes and grounding. And I think that's a fantastic word, because everybody wants to feel grounded, and grounding is just kind of it parlays into, how healthy it is to be grounded. Or
I mean, think about it. Our bodies are what, 70 to 80% water? Why wouldn't we be affected by the moon when it can pull the entire ocean out of the beach?
Yeah.
Why would it not do something to your cell structure when we are made out of water? Think about it.
Right.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
Of course it does. And how you can tune into that depends on what kind of technologies you use that have this ancient wisdom attached to it. I mean, look at things like PEMF, and that use a really good torus frequency, TORUS, right? That's like that circular energy that flows around all of us. And when you're using a good PEMF machine, you're increasing those frequencies and therefore allowing for better cellular function and all the other things. And so all these high-tech therapeutic devices that, the three of us know a lot about because we've been using them in our practice for a long time now, and is now just finally becoming into awareness of most people. I mean, I think it's fascinating. When you led this podcast today saying that, there's a big surge in grounding, I'm like, oh, really? Like, okay. I mean, I couldn't imagine not doing it. I've been doing this since 2000. And so a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about for a very long time is now finally considered valid in scientific literature because it's made it past 15 to 20 years, right? And even then, 15 to 20 years ago, we were doing double-blind randomized trials. So unless you're looking at the wrong kind of science and the wrong kind of equipment, you're not doing the wrong thing. And just to be clear, none of this stuff that we're talking about today, I'm not, making any disclaimers that if you get a grounding pad, we're going to cure your cancer. Like there's no way that we can make those kind of leaps to any of this. However, why not give your body everything it possibly can have that we've been designed to have access to, which is free. Mother Earth. Protect her. And protect your body by being with her. You know, that's period. Bottom line.
Yeah. So we hear about all the positive, the scientific, the data that's out there, the research and all that. And I think it's great. Is there, well, just like anything else, is there others out there is there other science or research that says that it doesn't, that they couldn't reproduce, the health benefits or the benefits from it? Is there something that someone might read that they would say otherwise?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that there are. I didn't go down. I did not find those at the top of my search engines. When I was looking for research in my way as a doctor who's done laboratory research and looking at PubMed and looking at Google Scholar instead, the things that popped up to the top first were the studies that were done the longest time ago and in the most the most conclusive ways that showed the efficacy of how this stuff did work. Now, I guess if I went on a rampage to try and find studies that debunked it, I could. There's always something that's out there, but that's not my job. My job is to see how it works and why, and get to the science of it so that I can amplify a patient's body that comes into my office. When I learn about how neutrophil is an electric circuit, which is a white blood cell, right? So when we have a wound in our body, neutrophils go into the area, they encapsulate the wound in the bacteria and the stuff that's there, and then reactive oxygen species are spit out of the neutrophil to help contain and destroy the thing that's the pathogen, the bad guy. Well, unless there's a way for you, like with antioxidants and other things, or cold laser therapy, or PEMF, or hyperbaric oxygen therapy, all the things that we use, unless you have those things working alongside of our natural electric circuit of immunology cells, you keep getting this feedback loop of tissue getting damaged, because the free radicals that get extracted from the ROS being eliminated from the neutrophil will just take electrons from the healthy tissue next door to become neutralized, right? So when you're looking at something like grounding, where we have an abundantly infinite, impossible to ever end source of ROS neutralization, why would you not want to use that?
On that note, I'm going to be the devil's advocate, because there's going to be people listening to a devil's advocate. A lot of people, when they hear the word grounding, I know ignorance is a big part of it, but they'll hear the word grounding and they immediately think of hippie pseudoscience, all that kind of stuff. How does the true science override that? How do we get past that? I guess the time could be one thing, but how do we get past that?
I don't know if you're talking so much about science here or social science, honestly, Terry, because the science has been screaming from the mountaintops about how this works for decades now, but how our social science and how we receive it is the problem, right? Is what you're saying, honestly. And people, we're in this really interesting time where our world is changing. Our minds are changing. We're noticing now that things that we've invested our lives in for 20, 40, I won't say how many years you've been years we've been doing things. We have had the privilege and the honor of being in clinics and creating these healing events over and over and over and over again with our hands and the equipment that we use, and doing them with nature first as chiropractors, integrative medicine experts, and the practitioners that we are. So we are living in a bubble, the three of us on this show right now. To me, this stuff is no brainer. Like, duh, of course it works. I've seen it over and over again. Why would it not work? Right? But it's true that we do live in a bubble. And unfortunately, the bubble that needs to be popped is that people now have the 3-second attention span, 6 seconds if you're lucky. And you need to prove within that amount of time that you can show in an entertaining, TikTok-y way how important these things are. And you know what? I will any day listen to hippy dippy bullshit because 9 times out of 10, what people were doing in the 60s and 70s are now being shown to be the most scientifically relevant ways to approach medicine. And in fact, there's an entire field of science that's starting now that's kind of based in that, but is using our new technologies, and it's called spatialomics, where they're looking at, I know, this is where my tech geeky gets in, like in my trajectory of my life at this moment, but it measures physical tissue structure and the molecular characteristics at the same time. And so biology, physiology, and pathology are all looked at once. So you're looking at it at the cell and how it connects spatially. So we're getting these entirely new ways of looking at what the hippies, I guess, were saying in the beginning is we're all connected. We're all connected.
Interesting.
And guess what?
Yeah.
We're all connected to the earth. We walk on her. We live on her. Yeah. We are part of the earth. We come from and go back to. Whether you believe that spiritually or religiously, it doesn't matter. The point is, these carbon meat bodies that we've got, the meat puppets that we are, as we have our feet on this planet, we have this one shot around, and our minds can expand into spaces that our bodies could never possibly imagine, but our minds will take our bodies where they need to go too because of that interconnectivity. You just got to listen and just got to be open enough to realize that we're here to do this together as a unified, symbiotic, and precious way. And, hopefully more of that change is happening now because I'm seeing it. I'm seeing revolutions in this, in the tech industry. I'm seeing renaissances of it in our own industry. Our group of people who have been screaming about this kind of information are now being looked at as experts rather than wanting to be put in jail like our forefathers were, right? So, as long as we keep speaking the science and we keep showing the clinical results, then the rest of the culture will start to be able to have the inspiration that we do in our bubble every day.
Oh, Grace. That was actually a perfect way to end this enlightening conversation. So thank you. And I feel like I need to go out and take a walk on the beach with my bare feet. This is good. So thank you, Grace. Thank you so much for sharing that and giving us the science as well as just the understanding, the basic understanding. So thank you.
It's absolutely my pleasure to always share some brain time with you guys and just time in general. I adore both of you and I'm grateful for both of you. And the fact that we can have these conversations just brings me joy. So thank you for trusting me with Clint's work. And thank you, Clint Ober, for the work that you have done for all of us to understand how to heal better and to do so with what you've created.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Crackin Backs Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Crackin Backs Podcast. Catch new episodes every Monday. See you next time.